Hello, everyone. Welcome to Momming and Thriving. Today, I have a lovely guest. We met recently on a trip to Nigeria, and it was interesting. I've known her for years, but we knew of each other, but we've not met officially. And it's just a delight and honor to have her here today because we have something in common that we went through. And I thought she's the best person that I would like to introduce you guys to. So everyone, make Korede welcome. Korede, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was interesting to reconnect, and you sending that picture earlier this week where we had been at a mutual friend's son's 1-year-old party was really interesting to see us side by side, and then obviously put that next to the picture we took together when we were in Nigeria. It's really funny to just, funny how your paths cross. That's why they say like what 3 degrees or 6 degrees of separation, but sometimes I feel it's more like three.
Exactly. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, your family, your kids. Just give us a bit of information about your background.
I'm a chemist turned accountant. I have 2 daughters, married now for this is year 12, and have 3 siblings. My mom died when I was 13. And so I've had to grow up and look after my siblings for many years and help around. So, yeah, I always find it hard introducing myself. It's kind of like, how do I sell myself? But yeah, that is me.
We met in Nigeria. Well,
Yes.
originally, both of us are originally Nigerian, but you live in the UK at the moment and you lived in America as well. So, how has it been adapting to different cultures and lifestyle? Like in terms of the three countries, just tell us a little bit about that experience.
So I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in Nigeria until I was 16. And then I actually went to school in Ghana for 2 years. I did international baccalaureate in Ghana. And that was interesting because the school I was in, I was one of 3 Nigerians. So I guess that was kind of preparation for moving to the US for college because I was now in the minority, but I mean, everybody else still looked like me. So that was fine. And then I moved to the US for university and I wound up working after I graduated. Going to America for me was interesting because that was my first time going to America. So it was quite different. Everything in America is larger than life. And what will I say was the biggest culture shock for me? Going to school in America is just the way people are just very expressive and open about who they were. And one of the biggest things for me was, the way the Nigerian culture is so big on respect. I remember my college advisor, who was a grandma at the time, told me to just call her by name. And I was like, oh, with all due respect, I'm going to call you Professor, her last name, because I couldn't just bring myself to call her by name. And
Running.
then I met my husband in the US, and then we both moved to the UK. And I've now lived in the UK now for the last 12 years. The biggest difference I've seen between the UK and the US is that I think there's a better work-life balance in the UK as opposed to the US. The US thrives on people working hard and long hours, and you do get rewarded for it. But the UK thrives on people having a sort of balance between their work-life balance. So I think I've been able to kind of make the best of all the countries I've lived in and try to pick out the good parts of the different places.
What do you miss most about Nigeria?
What do I miss most about Nigeria? I think I miss the community. After being in Nigeria this summer for 2 months, I loved the community. I love the support system. Nigeria is a society in which we tend to have like, domestic staff to help you around the house. So that
Mm-hmm.
really helps you to outsource some of the mundane tasks that are non-value add, like, the laundry, the cleaning, the going to the shops, going to the supermarkets. You can outsource a lot of those mundane tasks and really focus on your kids. I love
Kids,
the
yeah.
community in terms of the fact that when I'm in Nigeria, I just feel like I'm home. It's the place I feel the most comfortable. I feel home when I'm in Nigeria.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I'd not been to Nigeria for a very long time. I left when I was 16, but I came straight to the UK. And although I go like probably once every 4 years, once every 5 years, recently I've gone more frequently. And what you said is so true. The community, that just feeling of being at home, not having to morph yourself to be something else,
Yeah, because
it's,
everywhere
it's
you go,
comfortable.
Yes, it's comfortable everywhere you go. You see people that look like you. It just feels relaxed. You feel home. There's a feeling about being home that you just get from like, these are my people. And yeah, you don't have to be anyone or do anything special. You're just you.
So, what's one high about living abroad, and what's one low? What would you say
I
is one
think
high,
one
one
high
low?
is getting to experience different cultures, getting to learn from other people, see how things are done differently. And I think travel expands your horizons in a way that you can't get from reading a book or watching a movie. And I just feel like travel is a great way to learn. It's a
Hmm.
great way to learn how to relate with people and to understand different cultures. In terms of lows, I think just being away from home and what is familiar is just different, and you've got to learn to adapt and to realize that different places work differently. But yeah, I think the low is just being away from home and what is familiar.
Absolutely, I agree. I said this once to someone that I never felt like a minority. I never felt different till I stepped out of Nigeria. And then as soon as you get to Heathrow, you fill a form, it says ethnic minority. What's that? I think we get so used to even filling forms like
Yes.
that. But
And then
then in
you
Nigeria, you just knew you were a person. You
yeah,
didn't know
you
you
were
were
just
black.
you. You were Tonya, was Korede, like you're who you
That's
are.
it.
And it's just little things. Like, for example, my daughter does ballet in school and she's the only black girl in her class. And the other day she came up and said, "Oh, I'm the only one in my class that doesn't have a silky ponytail in terms of tying her hair up." And I just thought about it that yes, she's Nigerian, but she's probably more British than Nigerian because she's growing up here in England. And the thought of not having a silky ponytail never crossed my mind because everybody in my class in primary school had hair exactly like mine. We all had afro hair.
Yeah.
So it's interesting navigating that, bringing her up here. And obviously, she's a first generation immigrant.
She's
I'm
second
an
generation.
She's second generation. I'm first generation. So bringing her up as a second generation, me being a first generation, I'm also having to learn things about the British culture, like what a Sunday roast is, what's made up of a Sunday roast. And it's just interesting, like seeing it from the eyes of a parent as opposed to just an individual adult being here. It's different because they
Mhm.
learn different things in school and they ask you questions. And yeah, we're both navigating this journey together.
We are. We don't even have all the answers. I think that was one of the reasons why, for me, it was so important to take the kids to Nigeria this year. Because my boys were born in the UK and we moved to Dubai 5 years ago. So now they're even like there's like three cultures now. So there is the Nigerian culture, there is a bit of a British influence, and then there is the Arab culture now.
Yeah, so
So
they're
it's
third
now like it's
culture.
like they're third culture kids. And I thought, okay, so I need to be very intentional about taking them home. This is where you're from. This is where all your ancestors, thousands of years, were from here. And
Yeah.
okay, you're born in London, and we have family in London because a big part of our family is in London as well. But then you live in Dubai now. But this is just so you know, this is Nigeria. You speak this language, so it's almost like in being intentional. Because I think with us, we weren't that intentional because we grew up around it. So for us, it was second nature. But for our kids,
We have to be
if it's not like
intentional.
intentionally, yeah, they would just
We have
easily
to
just
be
like,
intentional about it. Yeah. So I spend the summers in Nigeria with my daughters. This is the second year that we've done it. Last year we were there
mhm,
for 7 weeks. This year we were there for 8 weeks. So that's that's how I'm approaching it now. My intention is to
yeah,
spend as many summers as we can in Nigeria so they get to experience the Nigerian culture firsthand and
fully.
immerse themselves in
Hmm.
it. So while we are there, they engage with other people that look like them. They go on play dates. They go to summer camp in Nigeria. They get to experience it. And then this summer, for the first time, I took them outside of Lagos. We went to Abeokuta to Olumorok, and they really enjoyed it. My daughter had a lovely, well, my daughters, I say my daughter because the older one was more aware of what was going on. She really enjoyed it, and she came back to school and told all her friends that she climbed the mountain.
Let's talk about your journey to being a mom. 11 years ago, you started your journey to motherhood. Can you tell us about that experience?
That was, is it 11 years ago? What year are we in? 2023. No, actually 12 years ago. Actually 12 years
12
ago.
years ago, okay.
So I got pregnant right after my my wedding, which is another story. It's another story in itself. And I was very sick all throughout the beginning of the pregnancy. And I was in between moving from America to England at the time. And it turned out I had something called hyperemesis, which is an extreme form of morning sickness. I was unable to keep any food or liquids down. And I'm not a big person naturally, but I lost so much weight. My weight was like about 45 kilos. And I had to be admitted to hospital on IV fluids. And when I moved to England, it was December, I remember the date, December 5th, 2011, I went for my 20-week scan. I was actually late for the appointment, and I got there, and they said, oh, they'll just manage to squeeze me in after the last person, which they did. And I remember I had been so excited because where I lived, NHS Trust then didn't used to disclose the gender of the baby, but I was like, I'm going to ask them anyway. Like, I need to know how I'm going to organize the nursery, how I'm going to do this, going to do that. I remember going into the scan, and the sonographer starts to scan, and then he's scanning and scanning and scanning. And then he goes, oh, I can see something on the right side. And I was like, oh, yes, I've been having some pain on my right side. I was like, oh, no, not you, the baby. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get somebody to look at this. And then the senior midwife or midwife practitioner, she comes in and escorts me into the side room, and she brings me a box of tissues, and she says something about congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And then at this point, I'm still confused. And, before the appointment, they sent me a letter saying what the appointment was going to be like. And in that moment, as she handed me the box of tissues, everything from the letter came flooding back. And I was like, wait, they've said that if they find anything wrong, they'll put you in a side room, somebody come and talk to you. And I was like, what was it that she called that thing? And I grabbed my phone and I was like, congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And I started to read, and then the tears just started flowing. And I think she must have been gone for maybe like 5 minutes, but I felt like I had researched everything about congenital diaphragmatic hernia in those 5 minutes. And then by the time she came back, I remember I called Pastor Shola Adeyaga from Jesus House in London. I was like, oh my God, this is what they're saying, that my baby's going to die. And he prayed with me, told me to calm down. And the nurse came back in, and she's like, oh, I'm going to have to come back the next day to see a consultant. So I called my sister-in-law to come pick me up. And I remember the date because it was my husband's first day at a new job. So my sister-in-law came to pick me up and went home, and I told my husband everything, and I came back the next day and I saw the consultant. He was actually very rude. He scanned me, and then he was like, yes, confirm congenital diaphragmatic hernia, refers to UCLH for further information. And then he went on to ask me if I was even eligible for the NHS. And I was just like, you know what? Not today.
Sorry?
Not today, not today. I was like, you know what? I have bigger things to do. But I remembered his name, and I kept it in my memory bank for the future. And I was like, you know what? Not today. So I got referred to University College, London, and I went off there. I was like, I can't remember if it was later that afternoon or the next morning. I feel like it was the next morning. I can't remember now. But I remember I got there, and in the room, there was maybe like 10 doctors or so. They did the scans, everything. And then they pulled me into a side room, and they said, okay, so what do I know so far? And I was like, well, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, 50% chance of survival. And I was like, okay. And he was like, okay, I needed to come back the next day for further testing. And they needed to make sure there was nothing else wrong with the baby. So they had to do amniocentesis, which they did. And they were going to call me with the results of the amnio in a few weeks. I went back the next day, and I saw another set of consultants again. And they did more scans and everything. And again, I called into another side room, and the guy said to me, so what do I know so far? And I was like, 50% chance of survival. The baby's delivery will be planned here at UCLH and then transferred to Gosh. Gosh is Greater Ormond Street Hospital. They'll do the repair surgery. And he was like, oh, the chances of survival are actually much lower. And I was like, 40%? He was like, no. I was like, 35? He was like, no, it's like, we're looking at 25% or lower. And then I was like, this is interesting. I was like, okay, no problem. So they said that they would refer me to the professor at King's College who specializes in this, Professor Nicolaides. Before Christmas as well, I went to go see Professor Nicolaides. And he is the only one currently in the UK that does the procedure. It's a procedure where they do surgery on you while the baby is still in utero. And it's actually, I think, not only just the only person in the UK, I believe it's the only person in Europe currently that does it. So I went off to see Professor Nicolaides at King's College Hospital. And I remember he did the scan and he was like, oh, so what have you been told? And I was like, yeah, 25%. And he was like, much lower. I was like, okay. He's like, 10% at best. If my baby would make it to term, and that if he made it to term, chances of survival were 10% if there was nothing else wrong with him. And I was like, okay, 10%, okay, there's still a chance. And so he said, well, we wait for the results of the amnio to come back. If the amniocentesis was clear and that there was no chromosomal disorders, he would go ahead and do the procedure.
What was that wait like between waiting for the amniocentesis result? What was that? Like, you went back home, what was the experience? Because I've had to do that, by the way. And for me, it's the worst.
I've had a lot of low moments in my life. It was at the point, it was definitely the lowest moment of my life because I was already extremely sick in the pregnancy. I had been admitted to hospital for a couple of times already on IV fluids. I was throwing up so much that I was throwing up blood because the acid from my stomach had damaged the walls of my esophagus. So I was just like, how did I arrive at this point? Congenital diaphragmatic hernia. I'd never heard of it before. It's not something that's genetic. It's something that's random, 1 in 5,000. How the heck did I wind up as 1 in 5,000? And I remember the day they called me about the amnio. The lady called me and said, oh, Mrs. Adesanoye, I'm so sorry. And I was like, I literally had put my hands on my head and I was like, she said, I'm so sorry, there's something wrong. She's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just calling you. I was like, you could have led with, you should just have avoided the I'm so sorry. So it was a trying time, very, very trying. So I went back for the procedure with the professor, and basically it's done while you're awake. You get a local anesthesia on your tummy, and they make three incisions, 1 for the camera and 2 for the instruments. And they go in and put a balloon the size of a fingernail in the baby's windpipe. And I won't bore you with the science, but the basics of it is that there's another birth defect that babies are born with a blocked windpipe, and that causes their lungs to overgrow. So the basic science behind it is that because a diaphragmatic hernia is what? That your diaphragm is a muscle that separates your lungs and your heart from everything else below. So your liver, your intestines, your kidneys are all below your diaphragm. And above the diaphragm is the lungs and the heart. So with the hole in the diaphragm, it meant that the lungs weren't able to develop properly because your lungs are squishy like balloons. And then you have the liver, which is hard. So the liver was in the chest, which means the lungs did not have enough space to grow. So the whole point of putting the balloon in the throat was then to block it, to try and mimic the other birth defect in which the lungs overdevelop. So that's a very simplified 3-year-old version of explaining it. So I went in for the procedure. Professor put the balloon in my throat, and then I had to wear a medical bracelet that said the baby had a balloon in the throat, and if I was going to go into labor, the balloon had to be popped as soon as the baby was born. Otherwise, the baby wouldn't be able to breathe, and that would lead to brain damage, which had unfortunately happened to another patient, which is why they started making people wear the bracelet. So I wore the bracelets for the next several weeks. I continued to be sick. I was admitted again to hospital for pretty much the whole month of February. And I was on IV fluids, unable to keep anything down. I was eventually discharged at the end of February, and the balloon was due to be out first week in March. All through this period, I had appointments twice a week at London, once a week at King's College, and once a week at my local hospital. So I was in hospital for the most part. That's what I did. I didn't work. I was just trying to figure out a way to keep my baby alive. So I'm sorry, it's quite a long story. So I went back in for the procedure to remove the balloon. which happens at about, I believe it was about 32 weeks. So that, once the baby is delivered, then the baby will be able to breathe normally. So I went back for the procedure, and at the time it was also discovered that I had something called polyhydramnios, which means I had excess amniotic fluid. So they wound up draining, I want to say it was about 2.5 liters of fluid.
Wow.
Basically, by the time because I was also struggling to breathe quite a bit, because obviously there was so much fluid, which was also pushing up against my lungs. And so they drained all that fluid. From draining the fluid, I dropped like 3 kilos that's how much fluid they drained off. And everything seemed fine then until I started having contractions towards the end of March. And I went to my local hospital, and the ambulance blue lighted me to University College Hospital. There was about 15 doctors, 5 baby doctors, and everything was just going on really quick. And then they determined that I was not in labor. So I was taken down to the antenatal ward. And they said, like, if I don't go into labor within a day or two, they'll send me back home to come back later, because they already had a planned delivery date. Because he had to have a planned delivery, because there was going to be, he needed to have a lot of support when he was born. So they didn't want me to just go into labor spontaneously. But the night before I was supposed to be discharged back home, I got up from my hospital bed and my waters had broke, and it was just red everywhere. There was so much water that as I opened the door to call to the midwife, it just flowed out into the waiting area. And then everything just went boom, 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 boom. I was taken upstairs again, but I wasn't in active labor. So they eventually induced me, and I wound up being in labor for 3 days. He was born 3 days after my water broke. It was the most intense 3 days ever. But eventually,
Did they suggest CS, or they wanted you to have the baby naturally?
yes, for a couple of reasons. They say that babies that are born vaginally, that have a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, tend to do better than those that are born via cesarean section. And also, cesarean is a major operation. And in general, if they're not sure of the viability of the baby, they will not put the mother's health at risk to do a cesarean.
Right. Okay.
Because it's major surgery.
Yeah.
So, because Ademide had only about a 10% chance of survival, unless it was medically necessary, they were not going to do a cesarean. So eventually, on the 31st of March, 2012, in the early hours of the morning, I think there was about 4 neonatologists, 2 OBGYNs, and 1 midwife. The room was packed. And at this point, I had the full epidural. I couldn't feel anything from waist down. The midwife had to tell me when I was having a contraction so I could push. And he was born. And, obviously because he couldn't breathe properly when he was born, because his lungs were underdeveloped. So he didn't even cry when he was born. He immediately was put on a ventilator and taken away to the ICU. And I was so numb from the epidural that I couldn't walk. So the midwife and my husband helped me to take a shower. And then they took me down to the postnatal ward. And when the epidural finally wore off and I could walk, that was really, really the beginning of motherhood. That was where it started. Because as I walked upstairs to go to the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit, I ran into the consultants that had delivered my son. And you know how, trying to make light of a difficult situation. I said, "Oh, how's my son? All 10 fingers and 10 toes?" The only thing we're dealing with is the congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And that was when, I don't know how to say this in English. I was like, that's when I knew that katakata had burst. Because the guy said to me, "Yes, but he appears to have a cyst in his eye. His ears are low set, and he has a bit of facial dysplasia." And he said, "I don't know if in your research you've come across anything." I said, doctor is asking me that if in my own research I've come across anything. Because while I was in labor, I was having conversations with them about the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and they had asked me if I was a doctor because I had read so much. I was talking to them about the research papers. I had read so much about this condition. So they were like, "Oh, where did I go to medical?" I said, "I'm not a doctor." So the guy said, like, "Wait, have you seen this in your research?" I said, doctor is asking me if I've seen it in my research, situation is critical. Now, I don't know which was worse. The fact that I had an answer to his question or the fact that he was asking me. And I said to him that actually it seems like something I've read called golden hour syndrome. And he said, oh yes, that's what he thought too. I said, Korede, this has gone up a notch. So I made my way to the NICU. I saw my son. He was on a ventilator. The NICU nurse said to me that in about a day or two, when he's stable, he'll be transferred to Great Ormond Street. The professors and doctors at Great Ormond Street had been notified that he had been born, because he had been born 35 weeks. So he was already 3 weeks ahead of when they
3
thought he
weeks
was going to
early.
be born.
Yeah.
So he was like, okay, they've notified Great Ormond Street and they're expecting him. They're going to come pick him up in about 2 or 3 days. So that was when it's just like, I literally took a crash course in congenital diaphragmatic hernia, mommy food, everything. I remember my aunt came to visit and she was like, have I bought anything for the baby? And I was like, to be honest, my mind have not even gone there. I have nothing. So she took me to, there used to be Mother Care then on Oxford Street. So she took me to Oxford Street. We bought a bunch of stuff and I went back to the hospital. And if you live in England and you've ever seen an ambulance that has the word ANTS on it, ANTS, it's called Acute Neonatal Transfer Service. Inside that ambulance is probably somebody's little child fighting for their life. So the ANTS team came to pick Ademide to transfer him to Gosh, even though Gosh to UCLH is about 5 minutes, 6 drive. They had the whole ambulance service, and the little incubator they put them in is like a little spaceship where they put the babies in. So I was like, oh, can I ride with him? They're like, oh, no, that he's too sick for me to ride in the ambulance with him. So I should make my way to the hospital and they'll be waiting for me there. So they said I should probably aim to get to the hospital in about an hour and go downstairs, check into reception. When you have a baby that's extremely sick and you don't live near the hospital, Great Ormond Street will provide accommodation for you in the hospital. And they will also, if you're a breastfeeding mom, provide you with milk vouchers. And shameless plug here. Yes, Great Ormond Street is funded by the NHS, but a lot of what they do is from people donating to their services. So please, if you're looking for a charity to support Great Ormond Street, because what they're doing there
Absolutely
is
amazing.
life-changing. It's amazing. And the people that work there, from my experience, is more than a job to them. It's literally a calling. We got transferred to Great Ormond Street, and Ademide would spend pretty much the next 4 months of his life there. In between, we got transferred to our local hospital. Then we got sent over to Cambridge for a short stint, and then we got sent back to Great Ormond Street. And that was basically because Ademide was ventilator dependent and they were struggling to take him off the ventilator. And I remember it was in July 2012 when he was still struggling to stay off the ventilator. And so they redid all the tests again, all the scans. They did the ultrasound of the heart and echo. They did an MRI brain scan. They did everything again because they were like trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And I remember the day the consultant came to me, the cardiologist, the neonatal cardiologist, and he said to me that, oh, in this period, Ademide had already been on life support. He had come off life support. So we probably should do another podcast on that because Ademide's life is a whole different podcast. And I remember the consultant cardiologist said to me that she said, Ade's mom, his heart isn't connected properly. And he explained it to me. It was something called a partial anomalous pulmonary venous drainage. Basically, the oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood were mixing together. And I was like, okay, so what's the procedure we're going to do? What's the next surgery? And he said, it's inoperable. I said, say what? He said it's inoperable and that he's too small and too sick for them to do the surgery. And even if they were to go ahead with the surgery, that it's very, very unlikely that he would survive it. At this point, all I could remember of Professor's words where he said that 10% chance of survival if nothing else was wrong, but that if there was anything else wrong, he had a 0% chance of survival. And I mean, at this point, I had prayed, I had fasted. I mean, I remember they had me see the psychologist at Great Ormond Street, and I remember she wrote in the report that Ade's mom says her faith keeps her going, and she believes he will come home from hospital. Basically, she was trying to say I was a nut job. But and I remember I looked at the guy and he was like, oh, that you need to make a plan, that it's not if Ade will die, but it's a matter of when, and that I needed to speak to the palliative care team, the people that help you to die. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And, we just kept on. And eventually one day on the ward round, the lady from palliative care came and she introduced herself. Oh, hi, I'm so-and-so from the palliative care team. And I had to have a conversation with her as to how my son was going to die. A conversation that I probably never in my wildest dreams thought I was going to have. I just refused to have the conversation. And I remember it was the 6th of August, 2012, when the hospital requested that we come for what they call, the other MDT, which is a multidisciplinary team meeting, where they had discussed Ademide's case and they had reviewed everything they had done so far. So they invited myself and my husband and my family to come in for a conversation on the 6th of August to discuss what they had done so far and what we could do going forward. So we went to that meeting and they presented everything they had done. And they basically said to us that they had gotten to the point where there was nothing else that they could do for him, that they had done all they knew how to do. And at this point, based on tests that they had run, the heart wasn't connected properly. He wasn't able to breathe independently. The only reason why he was able to breathe was the ventilator that he was connected to. He couldn't hear and he couldn't see. And so they said that there's nothing that they can do to improve his quality or quantity of life. And that the only thing that was keeping him alive was the ventilator. So we had to make a decision as to what we wanted to do. We could stay in the hospital and wait it out. We could go home and wait it out. We could be transferred to a children's hospice. But basically, we had to make the decision of how he was going to go. We decided to stay in the hospital and to take him off life support. Until the next day, on the 7th of August, in the early hours of the morning, Ademide died. And that's the journey into mommyhood for the first time. In a very condensed summary.
I'm just thinking, as young women, no one ever prepares us for motherhood. But then when you go through that experience, which you've just narrated, how does one even cope during that kind of situation?
I don't think, first of all, it's not something you can prepare for. Having to bury your child is probably the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life. My daughter is having a birthday party tomorrow, my second daughter. You think of the parties you're going to plan. You think of them going off to school. You think of graduation. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Nigerian mom, you think of how you're going to dance at their wedding.
Oh, of course.
Nothing prepares you to go into a funeral home and they hand you a catalog and you pick out a casket for your child. Nothing prepares you for that. And yeah, that was the most difficult thing I've ever done.
What would you say was the thing that kept you going, you and your partner, your husband? Like, was it like a scripture? Was it, obviously, I know there was family support, the support from the church. What do you think helped in that situation?
For I know the plans for you. They are for good and not of evil, to give you a future and an expected end. Jeremiah 29:11. And I don't know the exact scripture, but there's nothing that catches God unawares. And nothing happens without God permitting it to happen. I remember there's a Joyce Meyer CD that I have. I've listened to it many years before I got married, before I got pregnant. And there's a part in the CD where Joyce Meyer is talking about a friend who was a pastor. I've forgotten his name. And they were building a stage, and his son was helping to build the stage in preparation for a conference they were going to have. And the stage collapsed and killed the pastor's son. And so Joyce said that, she was talking to the man and that he was so upset at God for such a long time. And he said to God that, my son was doing this. He was working in the church. Where were you when my son died? And the pastor said he heard God whisper to him, exactly where I was when mine died. And when I listened to that CD again after Ademide died, so what I have held on to and what I held on to then was that nothing catches God unawares, and that his plans for us are for good and not of evil. So there's something I say a lot. I say God must understand. And I have to hold on to the fact that God understands, because I definitely don't. And God allows these things to happen. If you read the story of Job, the devil actually went to God and said, "See that your son Job, let me try him." And God said, "Job will never speak against me. I trust Job that basically what God said, that there's nothing you can do to Job that will turn him against God." And the devil said, "Eh." And he did his worst. But Job stood steadfast. And the only reason why the devil was able to attack Job in the way he did was that God, for whatever reason, he permitted it. God was not the one that inflicted all those trials and tribulations on Job. It was the devil.
Oh,
But the
he allowed
devil
it.
had to come and take permission from God to allow it. So for whatever reason, God in his infinite wisdom, which I probably will never understand on this side of eternity, God allowed me to go through that for a reason. But then again, there's another scripture in the Bible that says that, and I'm going to paraphrase now. Basically, it says, after you have suffered a while, you will then come back and encourage others. I don't know why. And I'm not going to try to figure out why. But what I know is that God must understand. And it didn't catch him unawares. Because the Bible says, "For I have formed you even before you were in your mother's womb." And
I knew
every
you.
day I knew you, and every day you are going to live has already been assigned unto you, even before you took your first breath. Sometimes people, Nigerians being Nigerians, did you take any medicine? Did you go to this pastor for prayer? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do that? And what I've chosen to rest in is that God must understand, and God allowed it to happen for whatever reason. And I do not try and think, maybe if I had done this, or maybe if I had done that, or maybe if I have done that. I've just decided to rest in the knowledge of that God understands, and God allowed it to happen, and that his plans for me are for good.
When you guys decided to try again for another baby, were you nervous? Was there a bit of concern, fear? And how did you even get to that place mentally to say you were going to try again?
I went to
Because it's
therapy.
tough.
I went to therapy. I was in
Therapy.
therapy for a year. Shout out to Dr. Zoe for the days I would just sit in her office, in church office at Jesus' house, and she just let me talk. And we just talked it out. I just talked. And that and the grace of God got me around. And then when I got pregnant with my daughter, I remember saying to myself, okay, I don't want any extra tests. I'm not going to look at the reports, whatever reports they print out, I'm not going to look at it. I'm focused on the fact that God is good and I'm going to have a good pregnancy. And I got pregnant with my daughter and I was like, okay, this is going well. I don't have any morning sickness. Yeah. 5 weeks in, like a week and a half after I found out I was pregnant, there I was. In fact, I knew I was very sick, but I was in the middle of writing my accountancy exams, and I had the exams over 3 days. I tidied up my house. I did all my laundry. I put everything away. I went for my exams. I went to the bathroom. I threw up in between my exams, but I wrote those 3 papers. And on the last day, I got back home. I carried my bag that I had packed, and I took myself to A&E. And when I got there, they were like, "Oh, why do you have a bag?" I was like, don't worry. When you finish running your tests, I know I'm going to be admitted. I'm just here ready to go. And of course, they were like, "Yeah, ma'am, you're not going to be going home today." I was like, "Yes, I knew." But I had to finish writing my exams because I knew that once they admit me, I wasn't sure how long I was going to be there for. I wound up being in hospital for the next about 3 weeks or so. I had to be on IV fluids.
No. Wait, let's pause here. So the willpower to do those exams,
Ah,
knowing
no. Because the
women
thing
are
is that then
strong.
the accountancy exams are only offered twice a year. So if I miss those exams, I won't be able to write them for another 6 months. And I was a woman on a mission. I had been studying already for about 4 months for those exams. So I had to write those exams. It was on the last day of the exam. I literally knew that I at the end of my rope, and like I could not make it another day. My husband had traveled, so I put my house in order, packed my bags, and I wound up in hospital for the next 3 weeks on IV fluids and everything because I had lost so much weight. I was very sick. I wasn't able to keep any food or drink down. So I spent the next 3 weeks. I remember they did the scan. I was convinced that it had to be twins because the way I was sick, when they did the scan, it was only one. And obviously, given my history with my son, I was referred back to UCLH. Remember, I got there, they did all the tests, and I went there for my 12-week scan. And the consultant asked me, did I want the advanced screening? I said no. They did the scan, Tony. That's how they said that, or that they recommend I go for the advanced screening because based on what they are seeing, it looked like Adenola might have the same birth defect as my son. I say, Tani Moshe, who did I offend? And I remember I took all the paperwork they had given me and I stood in the hallway of the hospital and I cried. I remember I said to God, God, I can't do congenital diaphragmatic hernia again. I said, God, the people at Great Ormond Street, they're very good with hole in the heart. We can do hole in the heart. I said, God, I've seen babies that were not born with an esophagus and they created one for them. We can do that one. I said, God, as in, I started giving God a list of birth defects that I thought
You
that
were negotiating.
I could cope with because I was just like, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, I can't do it again. That's, here's a couple other options. And I went to him and then the next day I said, Korede, are you all right? How about no? We're not doing any birth defects at all. This baby is going to be okay. And I started praying. I said, God, no. I can't go this journey again. I don't know that I have the capacity in me to travel this road again. So, I had to go to the high risk clinic at UCLH. I was going every week for my appointment and everything. I remember saying to my consultant that, can't you see that they are twins, that they're supposed to be two, that I cannot go through pregnancy again? And he was like, no, there's only one, and that's more than enough for you. And I didn't get discharged from the high risk clinic until I was 33 weeks or so, when he said, every time he would say that, oh, you're not out of the woods yet. And I would say, different baby, different pregnancy. She's going to be perfectly fine. And he would keep saying, we just keep watching. And finally, it was at 33 weeks, I want to say, that he discharged me from the high risk clinic and he said, have a safe pregnancy and have a safe delivery. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. We made it this far. And Adenola was born, no complications, and she was perfectly fine, to the glory of God. Beyond praying, I also said to myself that, if you go to a Pentecostal church, whose report will you believe? That Ron Connolly song, I shall believe the report of the Lord. And I was like, so unlike with my son, when every time I would go to the hospital and they would give me the report, I would literally sit down, me, my computer, the internet, and I would read the reports and research it like I said I was going to have an exam on it. With Adenola's one, I did not read the reports because I was focused on the fact that by the grace of God, I was going to have a healthy baby at the end of this. I remember after she was born, I think it was a couple years later, I think when I was pregnant with my second daughter, I went to go check something in the reports. And I realized the reason why they had told me to go for the advanced screening. So basically, when you do a 12-week scan, they measure the thickness of like what they call the nuchal thickness of the baby, and that lets them know if you're at risk for any of the trisomies. And I saw that the reason why they had referred me was because my daughter's one had been slightly enlarged. And I'm so glad I didn't read the reports then, because the fear that would have caught me would have been much. Every time they would give me the reports, one of my brother-in-laws, who is the consultant, he used to ask me to send. So I would just scan it, I'll email it to Brusty. But I didn't used to read them. And if people saw me and they asked me if I was pregnant, I would tell them yes. But I didn't tell people I was pregnant, not because of the African thing where people are scared of telling people I was pregnant, but my faith was literally mustard size. And I didn't want people to start asking me, oh, is the baby okay? Is everything okay? My own faith was already I was managing with my faith. And I didn't want anyone else to make me nervous or scared. So I was just really focused on me. So I still went to church. I went about my normal activities. If people saw me and said, "Oh, Korede, are you pregnant?" I would say yes. But I didn't tell people. I mean, it's not like I told people when I was pregnant with my son, but I was really struggling where I was in terms of my faith. And
Your
I
faith,
didn't
your
want,
faith was fragile.
yes,
Your
I didn't
faith
want
was fragile.
anybody to make me nervous about
Mm.
anything. And so I was just like, I had enough faith for myself. And that was enough for me. But thank God Adenola was born on Boxing Day.
So when you held your daughter in your arms and,
I cried.
and you put
I
her on
cried.
your chest.
I cried. I cried so much because tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of thank you, God. It was just like, because something I missed out earlier. I remember one of my friends had come to visit me in the hospital with my son, and she was pregnant with her son as well. And she said God felt like she should give me the book titled The Shack. I was so upset. If you've read that book. Anyway, basically the gist of the book is that the author's child dies. As soon as I read the book, this was still about a month or 6 weeks before my son died, I realized that God was preparing me for my son to die, and I was upset. I was upset because why did she get to have a healthy pregnancy and I did not? Why did God tell her to get me the book that my son was going to die? Why was God sharing my business with her? And I remember she was like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And she was very pregnant at the time. I remember saying, "Oh, don't worry, you're going to have a healthy child. Things like this don't happen to people like you." And I was in one of my lows. Because,
Yeah.
people around me were having healthy babies. I call them class of 2012. And everybody, I remember one of my very good friends, they were having a baby shower for her because she was pregnant with a boy as well. I remember going to the baby shower with my sister. It was literally the weekend before my son died. And I said to her that, let's just go. She's my really good friend. And in trying to make light of the situation, I'm like, at least there will be jollof rice there. Let's go and eat jollof rice. And then we'll go back to the hospital. But when I got there were so many happy people towing. So many, because it was that age where all my friends and people were having babies. So there were pregnant women there. I remember one lady, she had a second child in the taxi. I remember looking at the baby, thinking, you gave birth in a taxi and the baby is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong. That is this how this is supposed to be? And then one of my cousins was there and she was asking me, a lot of people didn't know how sick Ademide was. So they thought he had just come early and everything. She said, I saw that, when you bath Ademide in the hospital, what do you use to bath him? I remember thinking, are you new? If it was that my problem was, what? She was like, African babies sometimes tend to have dry skin. And I was thinking, God, if I had problem of dry skin,
I'll take that. I'll take that.
And I remember one of my friends posted on Instagram about how her son had a slight fever and how it was such an inconvenience to her day. God has really taken me, because I remember I sent her a DM. I said, please, 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 if my son has a fever, I'm thinking of whether he's going to die. Because a slight temperature could be an infection. We're pushing antibiotics. We're doing this. I said, please, please, please. Your healthy child having a fever is not an inconvenience to your day. It's just have cold. That's okay. But I was in a very brutal, dark place at that time. Very dark place. And I remember I said to my sister halfway through the shower, I said, Falami, we need to go. I said, people here, they're too happy. And I don't want to bring my bukata to rob them of their joy. Because this were. And I was like, yeah. So we packed our jollof rice and we left. Because I wasn't able to be happy for them in the way that I should have. So I knew I had to leave. And I didn't attend any baby showers or celebrations for a long time after that. I mean, I went to a friend's wedding the week before my son was buried. And I remember somebody there asking me, oh, how's the baby? How's he doing? And then I realized that people didn't know my son had died. And I was like, he's fine. He's with his grandma because my mom is late. So I was just like, okay. I was like, oh, why didn't you bring him? Why didn't you bring him? And then thankfully the wedding hadn't started, because right there in the middle of the church, I screamed, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, that they hadn't started the wedding ceremony, because I would have ruined somebody's wedding. It was after that I went to therapy.
Therapy. Because would you say those reactions, those outbursts was Obviously, you're not coming to terms with what had happened or what was about to happen at that point.
I think it was the fact that, to be honest, if I'm being really honest, my mom died when I was 13, and I felt like God should have picked somebody else. I didn't deserve it. I'd already had my own fair share. Why me? Not that anybody deserves it. I just felt like not me. And I was jealous that other people were having healthy babies.
We're human. We're human. And you obviously losing your mom at 13, it must have been rough. And you probably, I don't know if you've even been to therapy for that situation, because I think with grief, sometimes we bury it and it's just there and we get on with it. But then to have that again with your first pregnancy, and she's probably the one, if she were to be around, she would probably be the one of your strongest support.
I wanted the most. So I was just like, this isn't fair. It's not fair. Like, it's not fair. That's just the way I felt, that it wasn't fair.
So how is it with your two daughters now? Like,
yes,
because I know you.
So I had
how
my
is
second
motherhood
daughter.
now?
That was the pregnancy with eclampsia.
Oh.
Sometimes
this is what you see with this podcast. I was like, maternal health is a serious thing, and it's not talked about enough.
It's not
talked about enough.
It's not even just your health in the pregnancy. It's your mental health, how you go through the pregnancy, how you cope after the baby is born. Because in the UK, you don't have much support after the baby is born when you get back home. Even though you have maternity leave, it's like it's you and your baby, and you've got to figure out how it's going to work. Yes, you might have a partner, but chances are your partner is going to work. So day in, day out, it's going to be you and that baby, and you just have to figure out how you're going to make it through. With my second daughter, so in my first two pregnancies, I didn't have any preeclampsia at all. But I remember it was about halfway through my pregnancy, sometime in my second trimester, I went into the hospital for a routine check. And they were like, okay. I mean, I had really bad hyperemesis again. I've had hyperemesis in all the three pregnancies. I've had to be admitted in hospital. My second daughter, Angelazin, was the worst. I spent so much time in hospital. In fact, when I went in for my booking appointment at 7 weeks, the midwife actually had an ambulance take me to the hospital because I was so weak and dehydrated. I had gone in for a routine appointment and they said, oh, wow, you have high blood pressure. You need to come in for weekly checks. And for some reason, I had also something called interuterine growth restriction. So she was growing, but not the way they expect. She was small also for the age of the pregnancy. So I remember I was going in for weekly blood pressure checks and everything. I remember I went in September after I dropped my older daughter in school. And the consultant said, okay, your blood pressure is really high now, but let's try and keep the baby in a few more days. I think I was 37 weeks at the point. It was like, well, let's see if we can get you to 38 weeks. And I went in the next day, and the consultant on duty said, who is the idiot that sent you home yesterday? And I was like,
I was about to ask the question, but I was just waiting for you to finish.
I was like, how do I always arrive in this kind of situation? God, like, why me? And he was like, there's no value added in keeping this baby in any longer. We need to deliver you ASAP. Sometimes when God wants to do something, God works it out. September tends to be quite a busy birth month, and quite a number of babies are born in September. I didn't realize that. But in the hospital, all the standard delivery rooms were full. So I had to be put into one of the, not an ICU room, but a high dependency unit room. But basically a room that had all the extra equipment. So when I was on the antenatal ward, when they were getting me ready to take me up to labor and delivery, a midwife had come to take my blood. I had one of those little plasters on my hand. So I get upstairs to labor and delivery, and, my consultant comes and she was like, okay, let's break your waters and then we'll have a baby later today. So she broke my waters and she was like, okay, let me go change into my scrubs and I'll check on another patient and then I'll be back and we'll have a baby. And then I said to the midwife that please, like, you know what, let me just get an epidural because this thing that I was trying to do, no epidural, is not working out. And she was like, oh, we need to have your blood to type and cross match. I said, yes, somebody took my blood. And she was like, there's no record of it on the computer. I said, what do you mean there's no record of it on the computer? And I said, okay, maybe I'm the one that is hallucinating. I said, can you see the plaster on my hand? And she said, yes. I said, she's like, oh, it's not in your notes and there's no record of anybody having taken your blood. I said, well, we're in a hospital. Let's send the bloods off stat. She took the bloods. While we are waiting for them to come back with these bloods, all of this happened in a 20-minute span, by the way. She now said, oh, you sound like someone that's about to have a baby. I said, what do you mean I sound like someone that's about to have a baby? Where is Miss Coca? That's my consultant. And where is my epidural? She's like, oh, your bloods aren't back yet. Next thing she goes, I can see the baby's head. And then the next thing she says, 20 minutes after they broke my water, is, congratulations, it's all over. I said, what do you mean? Angela had been born. I went from 3 centimeters to holding her in my hands in 20 minutes, 27 minutes to be precise.
Wow.
And that is when, as they say in Nigeria, kata bursts. My consultant comes back in and, and she's like, Korede, what happened here? I'm like, you missed the delivery and I didn't have an epidural. And she's like, oh, but it's all over now. I had like a superficial tear. She was like, I said, please, yes, stitch me up, please. So she stitched me up, or was it after she stitched me up? I can't remember. Anyway, she sits down, she's taking handover from the midwife when she just, lowers her glasses and looks at me and she goes, Korede, are you cold? I said, no. And then, when a doctor has a face that is like a serious face where you're like, okay, it's not fun and games. And she says to the midwife, take the baby from her. And she comes, she taps my knees and she goes, Korede, you have hyperreflexia. There's fluid building up on your brain. You could go into a coma. By this time, she had pressed the button. She was giving instructions to the midwife. And I started crying and shouting. She said, Korede, you need to calm down. I said, calm down, how? She said, Korede, I'm trying to... I said, save my life, how? How did we arrive at this point? Like, what do you mean what do you mean fluid on brain coma? Like, I'm confused. She was like, yes, I'm trying to stabilize you and save you. I said, People always ask me, why you praying? I said, no, let me not lie. I was not praying because I was just thinking, this is not how my story can end. This cannot be God's plan. Like, I've already had a very difficult pregnancy. Like, I cannot be at the point of having my second child and then I'm going to die. Like, I can't die. Like, what do you mean? I said, Korede, you need to calm down. Anyway, basically, hyperreflexia means that I was losing control of my reflexes. And if you've ever watched Downton Abbey, when Lady Sybil dies from eclampsia and she started having fit seizures. So basically, I wasn't having seizures, but I was on my way there. And basically, they gave me magnesium sulfate, which helps, gave me some medicine for my blood pressure. My blood pressure, which usually when you have preeclampsia, after you deliver the baby, your blood pressure comes down. But mine went up, and I was on my way to full-blown eclampsia. So that's how God used the consultant to save my life. Because
I wanted to ask, because like you said, with preeclampsia, once the baby is out, that should calm things down.
Yeah.
But what happened in that situation?
It's as if my life is for the one-offs, CDH, one-off. In some cases, it does happen that the blood pressure goes up. And that's what happened. My blood pressure went up. And not having the epidural is probably a factor that helped to save my life. Because if I'd had the epidural, they may not have noticed me shaking. Because basically, my body was like shaking and I wasn't able to control it. So, and that's a possible side effect of epidurals. So it might have been missed. I don't know. But God was
there's a coldness you get sometimes with epidural where you're having the shakes. Also, without epidural, you had your baby. You said you were 3 centimeters dilated and she came out.
I don't know how I did it, but the midwife said I can see the baby's head. I said, what do you mean? And then the next thing she goes, breathe is all over. I said, how?
Ow.
The word she used was that the baby torpedoed out. Because she didn't even say push or anything. Like 1 minute she was telling me she could see the baby's head. Next minute, they were giving me baby. And I was like...
Now, that seems like divine intervention right there.
I choose to believe it was God.
Right, yeah.
Because the sequence of events... because what if Dr. Tommy hadn't come back from seeing another patient when she did? Because the midwife...
What if you've not gone the next day?
What if I said, they said I should come back the next day? But it's like, there's so many what ifs. And that's why sometimes I just say, but God was definitely in the story. Like, because I look back, I even missed out the part when I did my 12 week scan with Angela, and instead it looked like she has some kind of trisomy birth defect not compatible with life doing. That I had to go for additional test at UCLH. While I was waiting for the test results, I actually went to church that Sunday. It was, I remember I went to go and kneel down. They didn't do altar call, they didn't call for anything. The way Hannah went to go and pray. I went to go and kneel down in front of the church while the pastor was preaching. It was Pastor Daps that was preaching that day. And I was just crying and praying. And one of the ushers came to try and remove me. I said, just like Hannah. And pastor said they should leave her. I remember hearing the pastor saying they should leave me. So yeah, pretty much until the end of service, from about halfway through the preaching, Pastor Daps was preaching about he and his wife's challenges of having a baby and how some things in life is just a but God, only God moment. And I said, God, I am in my but God moment. As I cannot bury another child. And I knelt down there in front of the church for the rest of the service, and I was just there crying and praying. Because I was like, this cannot be the story. So after coming through that, then coming to the birth, I was like, how can I come through all of that for you to now tell me that you are trying to save my life? But God. But God. But God.
Yeah, when you said that doctor sent you home at 37 weeks, for me, that's just ridiculous because in my situation, my first son I had at 38 weeks. I had him early because of preeclampsia. The second one was 36 weeks because of preeclampsia as well. And then the third one, my daughter, 32 weeks. So she had to be in NICU for about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So really and truly, there's not that much difference 2 days would make between 38 weeks. So for the doctor to make that call and say, go home.
And like, I didn't even realize till today. I don't even know how high my blood pressure was because I'll have to go and look at my notes because I didn't look at my notes because I was really focused on whose reports are you going to believe. Like I was like, I need to focus on God. But I remember he said, who is the idiot that sent you home yesterday? And that's when I realized that this is not fun and games, though. Like,
no, not at all. And this is why a lot of Black women, and not just Black women, women in general, but the statistics shows
it's
that in Black women it's higher.
Yeah, we need to know what the risk factors are. We need to ask for second opinions, and you just need to learn to advocate for yourself. For me, I didn't realize when he said I should come back the next day. I'm going to try to keep baby in for 38 weeks. I guess I didn't realize the gravity of the situation at the time. So that was my own ignorance, because if I had realized it, I'd have insisted on being admitted that day and kept for observation.
No, but if you look at it, it's even though we should advocate for ourselves, but he's the medical practitioner. He's the one that should have the knowledge to say, no, we're not going home.
Yes.
No, but I find now, just exactly what you said, that we need to read, we need to do our own research, and we need to advocate for ourselves, because sometimes there's this blaseness.
Yeah.
Or I don't know.
Black women are more at risk. Black women are 5 times more likely to die from childbirth than any other race. And that's because people, the medical professionals don't really look at Black women as patients, and they don't consider our pain and what we're going through.
That's true.
Yeah, so,
that's true.
But I am just literally forever grateful to God, because I could have been one of the statistics. My story could have gone any other way.
What do you do to ensure the well-being of your physical and mental health? Like, what steps do you take in your normal day-to-day life just to ensure that you're fine and everything is okay?
Post having my second daughter, I've been diagnosed with hypertension. So I'm on medication to manage my blood pressure, because even after she was born, she's 4 years old now, I have to be on medication to manage my blood pressure. So now I exercise. I enjoy it, actually. My exercise of choice is spinning. I love to do spinning. So I enjoy it. And so I found that while I was in Nigeria for the summer, I exercised 6 days a week for 8 weeks. It was amazing.
Wow, that is discipline right there. That right there is consistency. This is the thing we struggle with. A lot of people struggle with
Yeah.
consistency.
So, but obviously, like my setup in Nigeria was very different. I was able to do that. So, what I do now is I do try to exercise in one way or the other about 3 to 4 times a week while I'm in England. It's
Mhm.
hard for me to do the 6 days a week, but the exercise is really good. And I've also realized that I need to try and outsource some of the things I'm doing myself. It's like there's no award for super. There's
Ah,
super mom is a myth, and there's no
it is a
award.
myth that we
Your
need to deliver
children,
ourselves from.
your children don't care who does the laundry. They don't care who cleans the house. And so I've the things that I can afford to, I outsource them, and I I do my exercise because those things are good for me. And I've had to slow down a bit. So apart from my day job, I have a kids party business that I run, but it was taking a lot out of me. So I put pause on that. And right now, I sometimes take breaks in between work. So I'm not in a permanent job, I'm in a fixed term contract. And in between contracts, I try and take about a month or 6 weeks off to just unwind and take the pressure off. But I found that it's important for me, first of all, I need to take my medication, I need to do my exercise, and I need to try not to do everything myself. Outsource what you can outsource and accept the help. I know sometimes you want things to be done a certain way, the way you would have done it. But sometimes it's okay if it's done.
That's it.
And that's what's important. You don't have to be the one to do
Hmm.
it. So I'm learning to just stop and take the break. And the summers I spend in Nigeria with my daughters actually allows me to just unwind as well because I don't do the cooking, I don't do the cleaning, I don't do the laundry. And for the most part, I don't drive. I mean, I drive myself to the gym, that's about it. But I'm able to also take that time to unwind myself. So that's one of the ways that I found that I'm able to unwind. So I know that come what may, in the summer, I will get my time to take my foot off the gas for a while.
I think it's important mothers take that time because we're more than ever we're doing so much. You know,
Yes,
we're not staying at home. A lot of moms are working, and even those that stay at home moms, it's a lot of work because you don't
there's
have
still a
enough
lot.
help that we had before. It's
Yes,
a lot of work because, like you said, in Nigeria, in certain countries, you have help with the cooking and the cleaning, but especially living abroad in the UK, in the US, like you tend to do most of these things, and stress contributes towards high blood pressure.
yes.
You know, not having the chance to exercise contributes towards depression because exercise does a lot for our mental health that we don't even realize.
I need to take time for me and just, even if it's as simple as, just laying in bed, and that's why for me, like my kids routine is very important to me. I'm quite strict with their bedtime because after they go to bed I use about an hour or so to just sometimes I just sit in the room with the lights off, not with my phone, and I'm just like decompressing from the day, just like
Mm,
okay, and just a moment to just, nobody's calling your name and you can just sit still and be in the moment.
absolutely. So then following on from what we've just said, what advice would you give moms in terms of, like, for example, what comes to mind now is with the blood pressure, I didn't even realize because we don't check. I just thought, oh, I'm young, you know, I'm healthy. But
But
then it's called a silent killer for a reason.
yes, and black women are at higher risk for preeclampsia
Yeah.
than other races. I don't know the science behind it, but they are. I know it's something that as black people, as Nigerians, we don't talk about our family history. People don't, when they ask you, does this run in your family? Because sometimes people don't talk about, Auntie Lagbaja died, and they just say she died after a brief illness. They won't say that she had X or Y. And I think it's important to know your family history. It's
Mm,
important to, blood pressure machines aren't that expensive. You can get one off of Amazon for less than £50. Check your blood pressure at home. You know, get an annual physical done. You can check your blood pressure yourself at home, and when you go in for your regular checks, they also check your blood pressure. But know your family history because if I think they say that if your mom has had preeclampsia, you're more likely to be at risk of it. I'm not sure, but it's important to Make sure you're checking your blood pressure. Try and exercise 30 minutes a day if you can, even if it's just a quick 30-minute walk. It's important that, sometimes you don't realize the importance of exercise because you're like, oh, I'm not fat, I don't need to exercise. It's not about being fat, it's about making sure that you're keeping fit and healthy. And some of the Nigerian foods that we eat is so laced with oil. So it's not that you can't eat what you like, it's about portion control.
Yeah.
And
I'm so happy you actually touched on that now, because just this week I had an appointment with a cardiologist because I'm not on medication, but ever since my last pregnancy, my blood pressure has never been back to what it was before pregnancy. It's like my body's just refusing to go down to base level. And so I've tried a lot of exercise and all these things. And he just told me frankly. So he said, okay, let's go through what you eat. And so he said, do you have palm oil? I said like 4 times a week. And it was like, and the expression on his face, well, I just thought, well, palm oil, we use it to cook all our soup. Like we use it for egusi, okra. It's a normal base to cook with in Nigerian food. But apparently it has a lot of cholesterol, right? And a lot of our diet has a lot of cholesterol, the way we eat. And it's heavy on meat, heavy on oil, just like you were saying. So I'm now at a place where I have to sit down and actually think of a new way of cooking and a new diet, or
yeah,
modify my diet
we have to
massively.
modify our diets. And even if you use palm oil to cook, the way we were taught to cook with palm oil, you pour in, you could make the soups. I mean, sometimes what I do is I use blended pepper with a little bit of palm oil. You still get the same red color, but you don't need to put cups and cups of oil. But when you see the Nigerian soups at the top like this, they have a small,
Or ayamashe stew.
oh,
That's the worst one.
yeah.
But
So
it tastes so
yeah,
nice, but it's the
but
worst one because, come on, Korede,
it's
what's
all
the
about
nutrients?
moderation. Don't eat it 6 days a week. I've come to realize that, do I enjoy, like, for example, me and bread, I probably have some kind of gluten or wheat intolerance because it makes me very bloated. And I love bread, but I've come to realize that, Korede, do you really need to eat bread 6 days a week? No. Everything
No,
in
my
moderation.
yeah, everything in moderation. Bread and rice is those are the issues for me. Bread and rice, those I can have rice 7 days a week, and I don't need to. My body doesn't need to have rice 7 days a week. But it's
Yeah.
tough, though.
But what I
It's
find
tough
that
to
meal
retrain
prepping,
yourself.
I make myself a
Mm-hmm.
timetable. My kids have a timetable as well. Meal prepping and preparing my meals in advance. If you've planned your meals, then you
Mm-hmm.
find that you're more likely to eat better than if you're just going with the flow. And it's important to plan your meals with things you actually like. That is the only way it can be sustainable. Because if you're going to say, I'm only going to eat salad 5 days a week,
No.
you might last 2 weeks, but chances that by week 3, somebody is going to come and visit you, or you're going to go to somebody's house and they just have made one correct elasipo, and you're going to
Ah,
eat it. You're
we are
going to
gone.
dive right in. You'll be swimming in the elasipo. That's what's going to happen. So for me, what I've done is that there are the things I like, and they're in my diet. I like oats, and I like it with brown sugar and maple syrup. I'm going to eat it with brown sugar and maple syrup. I like boiled eggs, so I eat it with that. I guess fortunately for me, some of the things I also like are healthy. I love salmon, so I eat
Yeah,
that.
salmon is good. Yeah.
But instead of taking my salmon and baptizing it inside stew and oil, I have it grilled. And
That's
then
a
what I've
good
also
option.
find is that I try to have a side of veggies with every meal. So I put broccoli, carrots, cauliflower. I used to make fun of one of my cousins who weighs her food and measures all her food. And like, even for her daughter, she measures the girl's food. I used to make fun of her, but I found that, Korede, half a cup to 1 cup of rice is sufficient for you. You don't need to do half the plate of rice. So I do about between half a cup and 1 cup of rice is what I eat. So by the time I have that,
Mm,
I have my salmon, I have my 1 cup of veg.
veggies. Yeah. So you're on your plate. There's a distribution. There's
Yes,
variety. It's
and
not just like a big pile of rice.
I'm eating what I like. I'm not. And the thing is that You are full. You're like, this food is so good. I need to eat more. No, you don't. You don't. So you have to also learn to control yourself, and you have to know what your triggers are and be true to yourself.
Yeah, I was watching a documentary. It's on Netflix actually about the people that live the oldest in. So there's certain parts of the world called the blue zones where, on average, most people live more than 100 years in those areas. And one of those places is in Okinawa in Japan. And one of their cultures is to stop eating when you're 80% full. So it's
Yeah.
actually part of their culture. So just what you said, like when you feel there that okay, it's so delicious, but you already getting full. Don't wait till you're over full.
Yeah.
Like just
Yes.
stop at 80%.
And
So
then
they
you also have to know what your weak points are. For example, I love Coke. And I know that is something I struggle with. So I don't buy it in my house. I don't buy it and say, what if I have visitors? It's just not an option. I don't buy sodas. I don't buy juice. Since I came back from Nigeria, my husband bought apple juice. I guarantee that I could not drink water until the apple juice was finished. It's my weakness. I know it. And so I know that once I don't buy it, I'm not going to consume it. It's not in my house. I have sufficient strength to not buy it in the shops. It's not on my grocery list. But the minute it makes it into my house, I know
you
I
drink
don't.
it.
I drank the whole bottle of apple juice over 3 days. But now it's no longer there. I'm back to my water. You have to be true to yourself. We know that you like Coke, but you say, what if I have a guest? I need to have something to offer them. No, offer them water.
Wow,
Look after
Korede, thank
numero
you.
uno. You are numero uno. Don't buy it for guests.
Yeah, for sharing such personal but heartfelt story. And thank you so much for just expressing what you've been through. It's really, really challenging, but you've been able to overcome it and you're the other side. And it would inspire a lot of women actually going through things and they're not sharing. So hearing your story would definitely benefit someone. We normally finish the podcast by asking 3 questions. And it's just a statement. You have to finish the statement. So the first one is, what has being a mom done for you?
Being a mom has made me organize my priorities and realize what is really important. And that being there for my daughters is what is really important, but not losing myself. But being there for my daughters is really important to me.
When do you feel the happiest?
When do I feel the happiest? When my house is clean and all the toys are put away. But I genuinely feel the happiest when I'm doing something fun with my daughters. I enjoy just playing with them. That's being honest. Yes, and when the house is clean. I love a clean space. Doesn't always happen.
Especially with kids. But yeah, I know that feeling. When coming down in the morning, when there's no toys on the chairs or there's nothing around, it's such a calming, relaxing feeling. But by evening, So the last one is, if you could tell 5-year-old Korede something, what would you tell her?
5-year-old Korede, I would say the journey ahead is not going to be a smooth one, but you're going to make it through and everything is going to be okay. Trust the process and trust God and have fun while you're on the journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Korede.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's been nice chatting with you too.